Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. We're now recording, we're now broadcasting. I am here online with Princess Aliyah and her guests. So this is Wolf Spirit Radio, and this track. Hang on, let me sound. I've never played this one. It sounds like this. Nobody can hear it. But that went across that. Yeah, let's try that again.
Ooh, there it is. There's the Prowl.
Okay, so there we go. There's your show. So basically, I'm going to step back. It's May the 21st, 2013, and Aliyah, on your way.
Well, thank you so much, JP. He's producing from Scotland, so this is exciting. We've got an international audience today. Hi, this is Princess Aliyah, host of Leopards on the Prowl, co-hosting with Dan Smith today. And we're broadcasting live on Wolf Spirit Radio from the Great Falls Village Starbucks. Join us every other Tuesday from 5 to 6:30 Eastern Time on our quest for justice, best possible world, and protecting endangered species. Today, we'll be talking about drones among us. Guys are going to look very different pretty soon. Congress recently passed a bill directing that the FAA open U.S. commercial airspace to drones. By September 30th, 2015, drones will have access to U.S. airspace that is currently reserved for piloted aircraft. This applies to military, commercial, and privately owned drones, so it could mean a major increase in unmanned aircraft winging through our airspace. That's airspace to be shared with airliners, cargo planes, and small private aircraft. Our guest today will be discussing the benefits and the risks of drones operating in the civilian airspace. Drones will improve our ability to do all sorts of tasks that just about everyone would agree benefits society. However, we'll also have risks associated with that. Drones will help with agriculture, environmental monitoring, and endangered species protection programs. But they can also be a risk to mid-air collisions and ground collisions. We'd like to hear from you, your questions and concerns. Please visit www.wolfspiritradio.com and log into the chat room, or just call us on the show. The number is 775-657-5973. You can support our show and our projects by purchasing products made using the classic hand arts of master artisans in cashmere from our online storefront, www.cashmererose.com, KASHMIR-ROSC.com. And also, please visit our protectsnowleopards.org for more information about volunteering sponsorship opportunities for our endangered species program. Our first guest today, Dan, is Dr. Charles Adkins, who has a doctorate of science, and he's published several papers in the AIAA Journal of Missiles and Rockets and a paper on design of optimum propellers in the Journal of Propulsion. In the early 70s, Dr. Adkins designed one of the first small UAVs with full autopilot control, which flew autonomously to several locations and back to launch point. Chuck, why don't you start out with that and tell us how that was?
Well, first of all, I think the question is, where did the word drone come from?
Yes.
Of course, in nature, it's a male bee that goes out on his own on a mission, finds out where the food is, and come back and reports what he's found. In science, it can be either aerodynamics or ground-based. A drone is usually meant to be anything that replaces the function of a human being, be it a walking robot. It's somewhat synonymous with robot. And radio control devices, planes, and so forth, commonly are called drones. At the end of World War II, radio-controlled planes were studied. Shortly after D-Day, the Germans had B-1s and B-2s and even a B-3 supergun that they were going to shell London with. and we were quite interested in blowing up their launch sites, which were then underground. They had underground bunkers. Conventional bombing couldn't do it. So the idea was to put about 20 tons of explosive on a B-24 bomber and fly it through radio control. Interesting. 2 pilots took it off. They were supposed to bail out.
Do you remember who the pilots were?
Well, the one pilot was Joseph Kennedy Jr., the elder brother of John Kennedy, our president. And unfortunately, after he armed the bombs and said it was armed, he was ready to bail out, and the plane exploded. Probably some spurious signal or radio frequency blew it up. So that didn't work very well, and we had some problems. Now, the Germans did have a successful radio-controlled glider bomb that destroyed several U.S. shipping. So they were using radio control. And radio control planes were often called drones. In the late 60s and early 70s, I had an opportunity to work on one of the first autopiloted aircraft. We didn't call them UAVs back then. We called them RPVs, remotely piloted vehicles.
How often has the name changed?
Well, it remotely piloted because, like in RC control, the pilot is remote. There isn't exactly an autopilot. But now they call them unmanned aerial vehicles, and they generally do have autopilots. And they call them sometimes unmanned aerial systems.
Now, were the original drones actually used for something other than what they're used for now?
The first ones I know of in World War II were used as weapons, but the RC became a sport. They don't call them drones; they just call them RC clubs, radio-controlled flying clubs, and they fly small.
Well, weren't the original drones actually target practicing?
They were also used. Again, in World War II, to train pilots in gunnery, and they were unmanned, and they were also called drones, target drones.
Okay, yeah. Target drones. So that's how they originally kind of started out, as just a practice tool. Yes, and then as radio-controlled airplanes are also called drones. Okay. All right. Well, why don't you tell us? Is there a term at all relevant today to describe computer-controlled small aircraft? Well, they usually call them UAVs or UAS, unmanned aerial systems. Now, what's the difference between a UAV and a UAS? Well, an unmanned aerial vehicle may not necessarily have a full autopilot. It may not necessarily have systems for communicating via satellite or some of the newer technologies. It seems like every time there's a upward step in technology, they try and give it a new name. Oh, okay. To keep it separate from the... Okay, and then, so what about UAS is a system? Unmanned aerial systems include more gadgets, communication through satellites. And UAVs do not? Not necessarily. Back in the days when that was the popular name, sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Okay. All right. And what have you enjoyed most about designing and flying small aircraft? Well, the aircraft I was involved in designing in the late 60s, early 70s had a full autopilot. And it flew autonomously. Mm-hmm. And I think it was one of the first we made. It was a small vehicle. How big was it? It was about 6, 7, 8 feet. A large model airplane. The first one weighed about 20 pounds, which is very heavy for a model airplane. Yeah. And now, do you know generally how heavy the original model airplanes were? Model airplanes vary from now; they're very small, but back then they were 6, 7, 8, 10 pounds. Okay. And this one, using the most powerful engine we could find, 20 pounds, was very underpowered. An interesting side note is that I was asked to brief the Israelis on this vehicle. It was a twin boom pusher. Mm-hmm. And a year later, they had it flying over Syria and neighboring countries. It was called Mastiff. Okay. And in the 80s, I got a chance to visit with Maslot Industries in Tel Aviv. And they said they got that vehicle from Elpar in Falls Church, who did build the vehicle.
and they were designing one for Switzerland to fly in border control. So that was the first time I had heard of peaceful
which
use.
border was that in?
I think it was the Swiss. They were designing it for the Swiss, but they were trying to make an industry out of it. And of course, today that's a big thing. Is border control. We're thinking of using them. I think we already are using them for border control. Police, fire. These are very useful tools now and much cheaper than helicopters and so forth.
Right.
The biggest thing I think that we need to get done technically in order to meet this goal in 2015 for opening up the air to UAVs is collision avoidance. And this is a technology that a lot of people are working on. And as it comes to fruition, we can handle collision avoidance. They can keep from running into real airplanes.
But do you know what the statistics are by any chance on the regular aircraft that's in the air right now?
Well, the aircraft right now have communication with control tower operators, and you have human beings on board. I heard the other day a person now, an airline pilot, only pilots the plane about 5% of the time.
Wow. So does that make them drones then?
No, because in case of an emergency, they're there, and they could do what people do.
So basically a drone is something that can function all on its own without any intervention
with
from
onboard
person?
intervention.
Okay.
There can be external intervention. But the major collision avoidance feature of an airline aircraft right now is the human pilot on board.
Oh wow!
So when they get that solved.
But wouldn't that also be the same for the pilots of drones? Because there's still pilots that are going out and flying these things from remote areas as well for part of the time. Right?
Well, sometimes they do, and the NASA vehicle was flown via TV with a pilot. But when you have an autopilot, all the remote person is doing is giving it heading, altitude, velocity information, and quite often not even that, or making decisions based on information received from the UAV. So in future, these planes will be observation platforms, and they will take commands to surveil different areas and bring back information, radio information via satellite or whatever, or relay aircraft.
So, what do you think the future of U.S. is with these things flying around?
I think it's got to happen. Economically, it makes a lot of sense. You get a lot more information without risking additional lives, and it's much cheaper. The main technological thing we have to solve is collision avoidance. I think once we get that nailed down, it can be used. Now, as far as the general public is concerned, that's another issue. There's going to be more limits, of course, on the general public, just like there are in flying personal airplanes versus commercial airplanes.
Well, what do you think the chances of the FAA opening the airspace by next year are?
Well, by 2015, like you mentioned, there's probably a good chance of it. I think it'll be opened in a limited capability first, and then as the technology advances and they get statistics on collision avoidance.
So do you think they're going to do it in stages, perhaps?
I think things like that sort of come along in stages.
And so if we do it in stages, who do you think would be the first group to actually have a set of drones to use for commercial use?
Probably not the public, but probably fire, police, border control, things like that. Right. That would serve the public.
Okay, all right. Well, that sounds great. Now, are there any stories you want to share about your experience with drones? Because I know you've wrote several papers, and you've had you were like the first person to design the autopilot.
Well, probably one of the first. There were probably others doing it at the same time, but the fact that the Israelis picked up this twin boom pusher, that's massive. In fact, NASA picked up a twin boom pusher version of mine and used it for, I think it was called something sniffer, aerial sniffer, that climbed to altitudes and collected weather data. And radioed back the conditions at different altitudes.
Okay. So now, how long did you work in that project for?
This was the late 60s and early 70s, and then there were other similar projects in UAVs that I worked on.
Now, as far as technology is concerned, how far do you think we're going to go with this stuff?
As far as we can take it. It's like saying, how far can you go with aerodynamics?
Well, I mean, it's like, you've got the background on the aerodynamics, you've got the background on where it originated from.
They're already building cars that can fold out wings and fly. How the FAA is going to handle that, is something to be seen, but I think it's going to happen.
Now, do you think you're going to be developing any newer technologies?
How far do you think we're going to go?
Sorry about that. A little technical difficulty over here. Excuse me. But I'm sorry, I forgot my question now. But that's okay. Let's just ask you another question.
Okay.
So now that we've got this new approach coming in, have you heard any concerns from people that you've talked to about drones becoming more common to the U.S. and actually just as commercial use or private use?
Well, there are always people complaining about private use and invasion of privacy and spying and having your neighbor, look in your bedroom window. But that hasn't happened with the police and fire helicopters that are used right now. They're used for official business. The UAVs can be used exactly in the same way. As it moves into the public domain, there are going to have to be rights of privacy issues, just like there are with people using binoculars and looking across the street in their neighbor's window. This is not legal. It's an invasion of privacy, and the same rules will apply to public use of UAVs. I think a lot of this is fanned by the press that say the public is incensed, but I haven't really heard a big hue and cry from the public.
Well, which side of the public?
Yeah, the press side, probably.
Now, do you think that this can also open up the airspace in terms of more terrorist attacks?
Sure. And in fact, some years ago, I recall there was a threat of a small model airplane with explosives that was going to be flown into the White House. And I worked with the Secret Service. I know the person who was involved. He was an RC modeler, and he was. There were certain jamming and other things that people could do to prevent that.
Now, I actually saw this video yesterday, and I thought it was fascinating. And there's a group called the Black Sheep, and they took one of their drones. I believe it's actually an RC control craft. Kind of, not really, because it was a quad.
A quadcopter, yes.
Quadcopter, yeah.
Sure,
so
that's a helicopter.
Yeah, and they actually used that, and they flew it right underneath the nose of the Statue of Liberty, and around the fire pit, or what is it called?
Oh, you mean the torch?
The torch, yes. The torch.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not surprised. I think as these kinds of things happen, there will be measures taken to prevent them. There will certainly be illegal, I think, to do things like that.
But I mean, what does that make you think? I mean, the security in New York, I was shocked. How in the world were they able to do this? Statue of Liberty. I mean, let's just say there was an explosive in that. That would have been so easy for them to be able to do.
Technology is progressing faster.
But what about security?
And the laws and the security used to protect the people. And the technology in that area is just amazing. And they are going to have to talk about laws. But, in the past when people talked about weapons of all kinds, an AK-47 or those kind of guns, big cry from a blunderbuss. Our rights to bear arms were written back when people had a blunderbuss and a one-shot old-timey rifle. Now they've got AK-47s, and you need laws against those kind of things, which is a big issue right now between the NRA and Obama and others.
Right.
So, I would personally, I would hate to get out of a car in a parking lot and have a guy hold me up with an AK-47.
Yeah, that doesn't sound too...
I don't think I'd like that very much. I don't think my Walther PPK would be of much use.
Yeah, I was going to say you could take out both of your little handguns and start shooting back, but that's not going to do much, is it?
Even though I have a right to carry, I think that'd be a gun. And the police have the same problem. So I think there need to be laws, sensible laws.
Right.
UAVs
for drones as well,
for drones as well.
Now, what do you think... Why is the word drone considered so negative now? Because, originally it wasn't, and it didn't intend to be a negative word. It was just an ordinary tool that they used, and then it just progressed, and then eventually it just became a drone.
Well,
now people think weapons.
My personal opinion is that this is somewhat fanned by the press. Sometimes the press gets carried away in trying to create news rather than report it. And it's something the public isn't too familiar with. As they become educated, which I think is the thing we need to do, they'll see its real use.
Okay, great. Well, Chuck, we really, really appreciate you coming out here for the show. He was actually one of our live guests today, so I'm honored to have you here today and have you discuss your history of the autopilot and drones and your experience with them and the Israelis as well. So that was quite an adventure.
Almost every country has them now.
Mm-hmm. I believe pretty soon almost every person will have them as well.
Could be.
All right. Well, thank you so much again, Chuck, for coming in, and we will be in touch with you, and hopefully you're staying for our after show right here.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, now it's going to be me and Dan hosting for a couple of minutes before we bring in our next guest. Chuck. Dan, what do you think about all that you heard from Dr. Atkins today? The future of our drones. Can you?
I don't know.
All right, you're fine. I think we can hear you.
They can hear me?
Yes, they can.
All right. Well, I'm just beginning to learn about drones myself. I haven't had any hands-on experience yet, but I understand that.
What do you think about some of the toys that I brought in today?
Oh, let's see. I see a quadcopter, the Ladybird.
The little Ladybird quadcopter. That's right.
Wow, that's the first one I've seen I've seen the box of it.
Yeah.
I want to take it out of the box.
It's a tiny little thing.
Back here you have the Champ RTF.
That's
RTF
right.
Hobby Zone. It's a radio. It's not a drone.
No, neither one of these are drones. Because they're both, that's right. They're not programmable. They're both radio controlled. But this is where it all starts, I think, is from the fact that we have these in our hands and we're able to kind of practice with them, because I think the future is going to open up and we're going to need to know how to use drones / UAVs or UAS.
Right. And I'm also supposed to be learning how to use the 3D printer.
That's right, 3D printer, yes.
So that we can print our own drones.
Yes, that's right. There's a lot of things you could do with 3D printing, which actually I'm glad you brought that up, because our next show is going to be called Makerspace, Hackerspace, Join Our Space. And that's going to be airing on June 4th from 5 to 6:30. So those of you that are interested in finding out about 3D printing technology, I'm sure that would be a great show for you to tune into. So Dan, what did you learn from Dr. Atkins today?
Oh, well, I wasn't listening too carefully because we were having some audio difficulties. Let's see, Let's see, though. We were having a little audio difficulty, but I don't know if you can hear that.
We can hear that.
So we
That's
do have our
Prowl.
own leopard in here.
That's
now
right, our
at
little leopard
Starbucks
friend.
in
Yes.
Great Falls.
In Great Falls, yeah. So
He's on a short leash, though. Keeping him on a short leash.
okay, good. Yeah, don't let him go far away.
No.
Those are little guys. We don't want to mess them up. Now, what do you think about the future of drones? I mean, what do you think the airspace is going to be looking like? And how do you feel about that?
Well, I think there are pros and cons. I think it's a free country, and if you're let's say you're free to, move your fist anywhere except to the guy's face. And I hear a phone.
Oh, that's right. That
in.
means we are going to be having our next guest come on the show. His name is Rich Hansen, and he is the Public Relations and Government Affairs in charge of the Academy of Model Aeronautics. And did you know that they actually have 150,000 members?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
But I
they're
attended
huge.
that meeting.
Yes,
in
that's
Reston.
right.
That was my first model airplane.
That's a big organization, and they do a lot of work supporting hobbyists and keeping these toys available for the general public.
All right.
Hi, Rich. Are you there?
Hello.
Hi, Rich. Are you there?
I am. How are you guys tonight?
Good. We're doing good. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We're really excited to hear about AMA and what you guys have to offer. Now, I understand that you have over 150,000 members?
Yes, exactly. We have actually closer to 155,000 members.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a pretty good, big organization. Now, could you give our audience a little bit background about you, your programs, and a little bit about the AMA?
Sure, I'll be glad to. Well, I'll start with myself. I've been a modeler since I was 6 years old. I started out flying little plastic control line models that I got for Christmas. That grew into a passion that I've been doing all my life. And I've done just about every kind of modeling there is. I currently serve the AMA as their government affairs and regulations director. And I've been doing that for the last 5 years. Prior to that, I also sat on the AMA Executive Council, which is our board of directors. In my professional life, my hobby of model airplanes actually led me into a full-time career in manned aviation. Right out of high school, I went into the service and served in Vietnam flying helicopters. And when I got out of active duty, I continued in the Guard and Reserve and ultimately ended up spending 27 years in the military flying helicopters. I also had a civilian career with the state of Arizona flying rescue helicopters for 26 years. Spent 10 years working for U.S. Airways and most recently here with the Academy of Model Aeronautics. Now, the Academy of Model Aeronautics itself has been around for over 76 years. They were founded in 1936 to support the modeling community that had developed for even decades before that, in that model aviation has been around since before manned aviation, well over 100 years. Matter of fact, the Wright brothers used models to test their wing designs when they were preparing for their manned flight before they actually launched some of their original gliders. And the Academy has been providing organizational support, competition, government advocacy, and support for its local clubs since 1936 for those 76 years. And a big part of that has been advocating on behalf of the modelers in terms of interacting with the Federal Aviation Administration and the rules that govern flight within the national airspace.
Well, you've got quite a history there. That's very, very interesting. Now, let me ask you a question about the members of the AMA. Would you say they're contributing to the development of autonomous model aircraft technology? And what do you think their views are regarding opening civilian airspace to drone flights, both for fun and commercial application?
Well, I think we certainly have a segment of our membership that is interested in that new technology and is looking at bringing that into their activities as hobbyists. There's a growing community of people using that technology for their own personal pleasure, to explore that technology and finding new ways that it can be used within our communities. And I think that AMA and the modeling community in general certainly welcomes the introduction of unmanned aircraft into the national airspace, and it's pretty much the next evolution of aviation, and it's going to be a huge industry. I've heard as much as estimation of close to $90 billion industry in the next decade.
Wow.
And there are going to be thousands of these platforms flying for a multitude of purposes.
That's so interesting. Sorry.
Our only concern, if there's any concern, is that there's going to be new regulation to enable these vehicles and platforms to fly in the airspace, and they're going to be used for different purposes than model aviation, but unfortunately, the general characteristics of the platforms are very similar to model aviation. So we're very watchful to make sure there aren't regulations being considered and proposed that would have unintended consequences for our modelers.
Now, I know many Americans are worried about the drones flying over the civilian airspace. Now, can you help us understand the differences between drones, unmanned air vehicles, and unmanned aerial systems and autonomous model aircraft?
Well, there's a lot of gray area there, and I think the misunderstanding comes more in use of the terminology than in definition of the terminology. I think when you use the term drones, for the most part, people envision the militarized versions that have been very successful in the war theaters over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and have done a wonderful job of keeping our troops over there out of harm's way. And people view those as aircraft that do very detailed surveillance, tracking enemy combatants. They're even armed today where they can actually fire upon enemy combatants. And that's when people think of drones and people talk about bringing drones into the civil environment, that's sort of the mindset that comes with it. But in actuality, what's being proposed for the civil environment is far from the militarized drones that are flown in the war theaters. These, by and large, the first ones that you'll see in the communities are much smaller platforms, certainly not designed for any type of warfare. They do have the ability to gather data, so if used for the wrong purposes, could be used for some form of surveillance. But there's a lot of efforts going on in many states to create legislation to make sure that that is done under the right circumstances and for the right reasons. But the bigger picture is there's thousands of beneficial applications that these platforms will be performing. Everything from search and rescue to, well, let's just take the recent tragedy that we just had in Oklahoma, where you have hundreds of square miles decimated by the weather there, and a lot of the infrastructure that has been destroyed. And these unmanned aircraft in the future will be able to be used to establish communication links. They'll be used to do damage assessments. They'll be able to be used for lost subjects. And that's just one such application. Beyond that, they'll be used for agricultural
and perhaps
study.
Perhaps like even in a disaster zone, you'd be able to drop some like a food package or first aid kit or something to people that you might not be able to get to. So I think there are a lot of great uses for these in the future, but I think one of the greatest risks that people are associating with them is just the privacy issue. I think that's one thing that I continuously hear a lot, is, well, we're afraid that it's going to take away from our security. But if you're living in New York, I mean, those buildings are covered with cameras all over, so you can't walk down the street without being monitored right now.
Well, absolutely true. And if you take the recent incident in Boston with the bombing during the marathon, I mean, unmanned aircraft could have played a significant role in trying to track, find, and bring those people to justice that caused that. So that's another area where the initial thought may be that this presents a threat, where in actuality it's actually going to be a tool that will benefit the public safety personnel.
Now, what would you say motivates the members to want to build and fly, and how do you think, and how are they used with the AMA members?
Our members, well,
Yes.
our members really is the allure of flight, and the ability to build something yourself and bring that together and actually watch and create it and watch it fly, and then learn how you can improve your skills at flying that. So the basic portion of model aviation, as has occurred over decades, has been the enjoyment of building and flying and experiencing that model aircraft. And it also opens aviation to a lot of people that maybe otherwise would not be able to experience it, whether it's because they have physical limitations or whether it doesn't fit within their life and career paths, whether maybe their family life creates limitations. But there are literally thousands of people that experience aviation directly through model aviation where they might otherwise not have an opportunity to.
Now, how is it different for, like, would you say that most of them would prefer to just kind of build their own stuff and try to fly it, or perhaps buy something from a hobby shop and then customize their aircraft to their needs?
Well, the hobby has evolved. Back when I was a youngster, a bigger part of the hobby was about building, whether you build from kits or whether you build from plans, but basically starting from scratch and building an aircraft and then watching it fly. As the hobby has progressed, more and more aircraft have become ready to fly. It takes just a little bit of assembly to get it into the air. So I would say that the hobby has kind of transitioned from the build and fly enthusiast to much more so just the get in the air and fly enthusiasts. But either way, they're flying model airplanes and enjoying the experience of watching and having that aircraft fly.
Well, what do you think the future of model airplanes would be?
Well, I expect and hope it to be something that new generations of aviation enthusiasts will enjoy for decades to come. As one of the big programs that AMA has is their education and youth programs, where we reach out to youth and youth programs to help them experience model aviation with the hopes that they'll catch the bug of aviation and not only continue as a air modeling hobbyist, but also move them into careers in aviation as well. I mean, there's a potential void coming in the next few years where we're going to be short on pilots, aircraft mechanics, aeronautical engineers, all aspects of people working in the aviation industry. And one of the things that AMA is trying to do is trying to plant the seeds to bring forward future professionals in the aviation industry.
Well, now I actually went to my first AMA meeting last week because I became a member of the AMA, and that was exciting. But one thing that I learned when I went to my meeting was that there is a shortage of new hobbyists that are entering into the model aircraft hobby, I guess you could say. Now, is it because you think now kids are more involved in playing video games, perhaps, than going outside and in the backyard and putting something up and letting it fly, and if it falls down, trying to fix it? Because I think, that's one of the things that I don't see as much anymore. The video game industry has just really taken over. So how do you think we can try to grab an audience of the younger generation where they would be interested in building and flying like you did when you were growing up?
Well, I think it's a challenge. Our youth have many more choices today than maybe I did when I was a kid. And there are other things competing for their interests, and they're not bad things necessarily. It's just that there's more choices in our culture today. But what we're finding is that when you do provide the opportunity for a youngster to get involved in aviation, they do see it and they do create an interest in it. And even though they may not stay as a lifelong hobbyist, what we are finding is a lot of our members come to us later in life. They may have done this as a child, dabbled in model aviation, had a few airplanes as a kid and flew them, but they always kept that in the back of their mind that was something fun to do. And when they get at a point in their life when they have a little more leisure time and resources, they come back to the hobby. And although our membership is by and large an older membership, a lot of our new members are older individuals that get it as a youngster and are coming back. So what we're really trying to do with the youth is at least plant the seed. So even if they go away from model aviation as they go through college and they get in the years of raising a family, when they have that youngster that they want to find something that's wholesome and enjoyable and they can share with them, they can go, oh yeah, I remember doing that with a kid with my dad when I was
right.
And they go out and they get them on airplane, they take them out and fly it.
Yeah, I met a couple of hobbyists at the meeting that talked about how they kind of got out of it and back into it. But I want to also let the people that are just joining us for the show know this is Princess Aliyah, host of Leopards on the Prowl, co-hosting with Dan Smith today, and I'm broadcasting live from the Great Falls Starbucks in Great Falls Village on Wolf Spirit Radio. And our show today is called Drones Among Us, and currently we have Rich Hansen, our guest speaker from Academy of Model Aeronautics, discussing the pros and cons of the future of drones. And that takes me to that question, which is, in your experience, what are the risks of operating drones in civilian airspace? And do you think that they're likely to pose risks to commercial air traffic? Rich, did we lose you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Uh-oh.
No, you did not.
Sorry.
I thought you were addressing that to your listeners.
I'm sorry. So my question to you was, what do you think the risks of operating drones in civilian airspace are? And what do you think would cause the risks to the commercial air traffic?
Well, I think the risks of operating that may create risks for commercial aircraft would be the individual that gets into the hobby without any type of knowledge, educational, or instruction, and they unknowingly put themselves in a position where they may be flying in an area that they could endanger commercial aircraft. Quite honestly, in the years that AMA has been around, we find very little of that actually happening, and most people, when they get into the hobby, they go to a local club, find a local instructor, and they teach them the ins and outs of flying model aircraft. Of course, you can always nowadays go to the AMA webpage and find resources there as well. But the idea of somebody intentionally going out and creating a hazard for commercial aircraft, although it's not outside the realm of possibility, the likelihood is low. I think everybody knows of the recent report of an Air Italia aircraft that was on approach to JFK that believed they saw a drone on approach. And that may well have been that situation where you had somebody that's went out and found something on the internet, or maybe found it at a local retail outlet, went out and were just experimenting with it and not really realizing the risks and the hazards and the danger that they may be posing to the manned aircraft traffic.
So one of the main things we should focus on would be to work on a education program that would actually really focus on training these individuals to be able to assess the risks of flying them in air as well. And that would once again have to be experts. And I think one of the articles I was reading also just has discussed how the government is, as a matter of fact, training more drone pilots than they are manned pilots.
Well, I think in the services, you're exactly right. I don't quote me on this because I believe I read this correctly, that the Air Force now trains more drone pilots than pilots for their manned aircraft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't actually find an exact number of how many that was in comparison. So, do you, by any chance, know?
No, I do not off the top of my head know the numbers.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, can you tell us about the difference of views throughout the world regarding flying of model aircraft?
I'm sorry. What other areas of the world do they fly model aircraft?
Well, no, not what. Just the difference, the views that people have of model aircrafts around the world. I mean, in some areas where they don't have any.
I don't find a lot of difference in the views. Now, some countries have taken a little different approaches to how they interact or bring model aviation into the aviation community. Australia, for instance, is an area where they provide a fair amount of latitude for the national air modeling club down there which is the sister organization for AMA, to manage and oversee the modeling activity. Other countries may not provide as much latitude and put more specific regulation in place in terms of how, where, when, and what they can fly. But all of them, by and large, have programs that allow hobbyists the opportunity to fly throughout the country and enjoy the hobby. We don't find a lot of real overriding restrictions that restrict the hobby. As a matter of fact, in some cases, we find some countries that are actually a little more flexible than we might have here in the United States.
That's absolutely true. I'm actually looking to fly some of my new planes that I've purchased, and perhaps maybe you can send me a note about some good instructors in my area that can actually help me learn how to fly, because I am a complete newbie to it, but I'm just more and more excited about just learning the hobby of flying as well, because I've gone out to the field over here in Virginia that we joined AMA part of. So that was exciting. So I'm hoping to go out on Memorial Day weekend and join the group there for my first flying lessons.
Well, that'd be great. AMA has a feature on its webpage, which is modelaircraft.org, model aircraft, all one word. If you go on the homepage there, towards the bottom, there's a Find a Club Locator feature that if you click on that and put in your zip code, it'll tell you all the clubs in your area. You can search anywhere from 5 miles to 50 miles, and almost every club has an instructor program, and they welcome new people to come out and join with them, and they're more than happy to teach you to fly.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Rich. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to be a part of AMA, because I know you guys have a lot of great programs, and hopefully I'll get a chance to meet you sometime.
I hope so, too. Welcome to AMA, to the hobby, and thanks for having me on the call.
Well, thank you for joining us as well. You have yourself a very good evening.
You too. Bye now.
All right. Bye-bye. Well, Dan, are you going to be joining me for my flying lessons?
Yes. Memorial Day, you say?
Yes, Memorial Day.
And where will this be?
This will be at the AMA flying field in Leesburg.
All right. Yes. I don't know if I'll have finished printing my plane yet.
Okay, well, that's all right. I've got plenty of planes that we could practice with. And I actually would like to go outside and fly that little quadcopter. That looks like a lot of fun. Hopefully you've gotten the missing piece for it so I could go practice again, because last time I broke it. All right, Dan, so what do you think is a good way of learning to fly?
Well,
and be prepared, of course, for 2015, when the airspace is going to open for drones, the general public and commercial.
How to learn. I mean, long many years ago, as a young lad, I did fly, rental. You can rent planes and fly them.
Oh, okay, like a real plane. So you were actually a pilot. You were piloting the plane, not unmanned. Oh, wow. So did you have a pilot's license?
I did.
Oh, okay. What happened to it?
Sailplane license.
Oh, wow.
Too. And you do have to renew the medical certificate every couple years. I think you have to renew that. So I have not done that
for decades.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, how did you enjoy flying?
Oh, I loved it, and I don't know why I haven't gotten back. I mean to get back to it when I retire.
Oh, okay. Well, let's speak with our next guest, George Hansel. George is actually a consulting electrical engineer and embedded electronics for applications including small UAVs. And in addition to that, he is a graduate student at MIT's Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics, where he studies the information theory of complex systems. Hi, George.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Now, let me recall, did we meet in Florida?
I'm sorry?
Were you at the Air Force flight place in Florida?
I've not attended one of those.
Okay. All right. And you did not come down with the rest of the team to test out some of the products to Virginia? You did?
No, I have been to Virginia once or twice, but no, we generally don't send all the engineers along.
Okay. Because I'm trying to remember. I know I've met several people from your group, but I don't remember if I met with you or not in person.
I don't think we've met in person.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess next time you're down here or we're up at MIT, it'd be nice to finally meet with you and hear all about what you're doing. So that takes us to, why don't you tell us about you and what you're doing?
So I am as you said, I'm a graduate student in aerospace engineering. My work is in the information theory of complex systems. That's kind of a jargony type of statement. Basically, we have this notion that a complex system is a system like an airplane, and the reason why this kind of research is in the aerospace department is because airplanes tend to be very complex. Is that things happen when you're designing complex systems that you don't intend or you don't see, and mainly this happens because the models you have or the models you have of the system that you're trying to build are insufficient because you haven't really built a system like it before. So I'm a little bit of a statistician and looking for statistics that we can use to tell whether or not our models are sufficient to replicate the data that comes out of tests that we do, for example. So that's my academic research.
Okay.
The embedded electronics I work on, some of which is for UAVs. I can't talk about too much in detail.
Okay, that's fine.
But involves power electronics for UAVs, which are, I guess, more or less things that you need to convert one type of power, electrical power, to another.
Okay. Sounds pretty complicated, and I have no background in that, but I will try to ask you some technical questions. Now, what are the technologies that you think are going to most influence small aircraft design, production, and performance?
So one thing I think is really prominent is electronics or microelectronics that go into cell phones. I think if we look at the current crop of small UAVs we have now, and think about why we didn't have these same things or efforts in the same area 5 years ago, the answer becomes pretty clear. Like, let's think about what's changed. The regulatory landscape has not changed. The FAA has still no clear guidelines on what we're supposed to do with small UAVs or large UAVs or anything. The state of technology hasn't really changed. We've had cruise missiles for a long time. We've had autopilots for a long time. And so what's really changed is the size and the cost of the electronics. And the reason that that's changed is because there's a massive consumer market in cell phones primarily that's developed things. So we can build small UAVs now mostly because we have the inertial measurement units, the things that tell the airplane what position it's in and what orientation and how fast it's going. We have those now because those electronics were built for cell phones, which is kind of interesting that what you would expect to be a really kind of powerful market, this kind of military industrial drone complex, really isn't when it's compared to the cell phone market. So it's a cell phone market that can really develop those microelectronics and not the other way around.
So do you think, just like everyone has a cell phone right now, and perhaps maybe 20 years ago you couldn't have really imagined having a cell phone and internet at the palm of your hands, do you think the future will also include drones as a regular, just another, I guess, tool that people use for, I don't know, sending messages or delivering food or anything else that would include like a product or an actual tangible item that I can say, oh yeah, you know what, let me go ahead and put these books on here and deliver them to my daughter in college, or my, kids need some food, let me drop some lunch for them at school because they want some Chinese food today, or something like that. Do you see drones becoming like a normal use of society?
No, I don't really see them being norms to that extent. I'm not sure if this is an inherent property, but as far as I've seen, it is. They tend to crash a lot. There are, and that's kind of a fundamental limitation on the expected value of things that people are willing to put in them. And they crash a lot, and I'm not sure whether or not that's escapable, whether or not their technology can help that, because they don't necessarily crash because they're poorly controlled. They crash because of really unforeseen circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's a technological? Would you say it's more of a technological fault within the components, or? It's
a intersection of a technological and a legal framework. I guess I'm not sure if this has already come up in your discussion, but you may have heard of Taco Copter, which is a somewhat hypothetical startup that someone came up with, where a burrito would be delivered to you by a quadcopter, or a taco.
Yeah, I saw that video in Argentina, I think. Was that in Argentina? I thought the guys were in Argentina.
It's been done in a variety of places. It was originally proposed by someone who's in the U.S. And is currently in the Bay Area. And if someone actually wanted to do that, the proposal was mostly a joke at the time. If someone actually wanted to do that, they wouldn't be able to. There's no legal way to operate a drone like that in the U.S.
Right. Do you think that would change once the laws are changed with FAA?
I'm not sure, because even if the law changes to allow that kind of use, there are still going to be accidents, and you'll have these things occasionally crashing into people's yards, certainly flying over residential areas if it involves anything about delivery or interacting with people. And even if it's allowed, it might have kind of ancillary consequences that make it not really worth the cost.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, actually, our previous guest, he works for the Academy of, what is it called again? Academy of
Model Aeronautics.
Yes, Model Aeronautics. He actually said that, reading some of the information about the future of drones, it's about a $90 billion industry within the next decade. Now, what do you think the U.S. government and the industry being invested in, what can they do to capture a large portion of this global UAV, UAS, and drones market that is going to be worth $90 billion plus?
It's an interesting question. So, as far as things currently exist, one reason that drone development, or the sort of small-scale drone development that we're talking about, has been so widespread, because of the spread of these very small inertial measurement units, very small accelerometers and GPSs and such. A lot of the reason that's been able to spread is because the government, or the U.S. government in particular, doesn't have any or had relatively little contribution financially to that. A lot of that was developed sort of by private companies, or not even developed in the U.S. So the fact that the things that it came from, or the things that these UAVs have come from, have been internationally developed, is what allows these things to cross borders. For example, it's relatively common for, or not unheard of, for aerospace companies to, on certain projects, not accept government funding or do their accounting in such a way that a particular project is not currently government funded, or the development of a particular product is not government funded, in order to not restrict their market to domestic, or in order to not restrict themselves to the domestic market, or to require them to get an export license for whatever they're building, because of, again, the regulatory landscape that is like the international trafficking in arms regulations and the export of arms regulations. And so when the government funds things like this, depending on what part of the government it is, in many cases, or maybe even in almost all cases, that introduces something that prevents that object from being sold overseas. So it's an interesting kind of catch-22 where you might want to capture the global market, but unless you do it very carefully, there are going to be side effects.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is Princess Aliyah, host of Leopards on the Prowl, co-hosting with Dan Smith, broadcasting live on Wolf Spirit Radio from Great Falls Village Starbucks. Join us every other Tuesday from 5 to 6:30 for our quest for justice, best possible world, and including protection of endangered species. And today we're talking about drones among us, and our guest, George Hansel, is actually talking about the future of drones and the U.S. government can do to be more involved in capturing a global market for these toys. Sorry about that, but go ahead, George.
Okay,
you
yeah.
were saying
that more or less summarizes the situation. If there are things the government can do to encourage kind of export of drones, but it might have to consider whether or not it wants to and whether or not it's willing to take the lack of control that's involved to do that. And a lot of that depends on the landscape or the regulatory landscape that companies in the U.S. who are developing drones see. If it's easy for them to get a certificate of authority to fly them in the U.S. for testing purposes, if it's easy for them to recruit customers because the customers are able to get certificates of authority or whatever equivalent kind of certification is required to operate them for some purpose over domestic airspace or in domestic airspace. So basically, I think the thing that's limiting domestic manufacturers of UAVs the most is not really rules that prohibit them from doing things, but kind of rules that don't exist. There's no there isn't a way for them to put enough money into developing products because there isn't a customer base that knows that they can use them. And so
right. So
the lack of rules makes it kind of a risky thing from a business standpoint.
Right. Well, thank you so much, George. I really appreciate you coming on the show and giving us a little quick view on the technology aspect of it and perhaps the future of how the government can be more involved in trying to grab a global market. And right now, yeah, you're right, it's up in the air and it's hard to determine that, especially because we're competing with China and they're doing so great with their technology. And I believe that with the U.S., we're really probably a decade behind them. I don't know. But as far as what I've seen in terms of technology, they seem to be really progressing. Although I'm hoping we have more graduate students and students like you and your team members that I've met at MIT that would be willing and able to change the future of the U.S. by bringing in more advanced technology. So thank you again so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I am looking forward to meeting with you the next time you're down here or the next time I am in Cambridge.
Yep. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
All right. Thank you. You too. Well, Dan, any plans of going to Cambridge?
Not presently. I don't. That's where I'm from, though, originally.
I didn't know you were from Cambridge.
Yeah, well, from just outside of Boston. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, our next guest is actually from Kentucky. good old boy from Kentucky. He was a farmer previously, and his name is Bobby Velasquez. I think that's how you say it. I'm going to have Bobby say it. He's actually the CEO of Data Tech, a aeronautic company that is building new technology. And actually, I met with him and his group. And hi, Bobby. How are you?
Hi. Good. How are you?
Good. I was actually just trying to tell the audience a little bit about you, but actually, I'd rather have you talk about Theta Tech, because you know a lot more about Theta Tech than I do. What I do know is you've got a great group of engineers working for you. I was really, really impressed meeting all of them. I mean, they were phenomenal. The ideas that they had and their dedication to the programs and the creations that you're doing was phenomenal.
This meeting, Aliyah, was all in Florida?
Oh, no, actually, we met in Virginia Tech. Is that right, Bobby? I think it was Virginia Tech. University? Yeah, it was Virginia Tech. Yeah, it was quite a ride. But yes, Bobby, please tell us a little bit about you, your background, and Theta Tech.
Okay, great. I was active duty in the Army, obviously out of college, active duty in the Army. From there, went into industry and had a pretty good run at robotics. Inherited the family farm, so I decided to move into the agricultural market as well. And I've been in small business since leaving active duty. Started a small company 2 years ago and attracted some great talent out of tech. And, of course, we have one UVA mechanical engineering grad, so the UVA people can all smile. The rest of us are Tech grads or the University of Kentucky grads, one U of L grad. But we're a dynamic group, and we are working for IARPA, which is the Intelligence Advanced Robotics or Research Projects Agency, on a propulsion system for a small UAV. It's a very exciting program because it's looking at hybrid power generation and usage on board a small aircraft. And believe it or not,
I understand your company.
Kind of apropos for this interview, we just yesterday successfully demonstrated for the IARPA people here in Kentucky the propulsor up and running at speed, and so that was a great milestone.
Exciting. Now, what was the speed? What was the speed that you guys were trying to achieve?
We were trying to get up to 6,500 maximum RPM. We believe we'll be able to achieve that. We went to 5,000 RPM.
Wow.
So that'll generate for the size aircraft that we're looking for, and all under electric power. It looks like we'll be able to generate roughly in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 pounds of thrust at static and 9 to 12 pounds of thrust at flight. So we've targeted a sweet spot of about 60 to 80 knots.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Now, I know one of actually past guests, he's a student at MIT, and we were just talking about China and how the technology that China has is phenomenal compared to what we've been looking at. And I understand that your company's objective is to recover some of the model aircraft manufacturing base that we've lost to China over the past years. Now, how big is this model aircraft industry, and why would recovering the industry help the U.S.?
It's going to be that's a long answer. We definitely have targeted bringing back a lot of the technology from overseas in the RC hobby market and in the small aircraft market. We believe that we're going to be able to do that effectively with some of the economic incentives that are available for small companies. We feel that that's a smart endeavor in between our research contracts to, further aviation and flight concepts. So essentially, the research contracts are our peaks, and our commercial endeavors in the RC market and small aircraft market are to fill in the valleys. And that would keep a small company very, very viable. And right now our numbers are lining up that we believe that most of our RC kits, when we hit the market, will be extremely competitive with the China market.
Really? Okay. Now, when you say extremely competitive, now are we talking? Are you looking into the hobby market, or are you looking into the actual technology that is involved in commercial use?
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting. When you talk about UAVs, and, we'll exclude some of the high-endurance UAVs and high-altitude UAVs from this conversation. Because
now, when we say high altitude,
it's very specialist, yes.
So what's high altitude? So what are we excluding so our audience can understand that high altitude means anything above this?
Yeah, above 20, let's say above 20,000 feet.
Okay, above 20,000 feet.
So we'll kind of draw a line there, above 20,000 feet. Most of those, UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle aircraft, are DoD specific, extremely mission specific for the Department of Defense. Mm-hmm. We are trying to meet what we believe is going to be the FAA guidance of staying underneath 400 feet.
Okay, so that's the hobby market.
Yes, and we're trying to stay within 12-foot range, give or take. So if you want to kind of look at what our bucket is, 12-foot wingtip to wingtip, that'll vary a little bit. Mm-hmm. In the RC market, they call it the super giant. But what we have found is that with the smaller UAVs and some of the smaller UAV technology development programs, there's a lot of cross-technology use. Now, again, some of the smaller UAV development technology is expensive. It's prohibitive to get into the hobby market. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to take that very, very quickly, especially now with 3D printing and some of the advanced manufacturing processes that are out there, to make advanced kits that would allow, the high school student, the hobbyist, to get back into the flight regimes and be able to afford it.
Right. Now, when we say afford it, what does that mean? I mean, what does an average hobby aircraft cost, a model aircraft?
Well,
I know there's a range for it, but when we're
there sure is. But the range that we're talking about, which is, the giant aircraft, the kits can run, I've seen them as low as $200 on up into the thousands of dollars range for the kits. Of course, you have to have the experience and the expertise to be able to assemble the kits properly. And then you start adding your servos, your radio control modules, your engines, and you can very, very quickly, a lot of the hobbyists I talk to, they target a budget anywhere between $1,000 in excess of $5,000, to keep their hobby up and running. Mm-hmm. And then, they're flight restricted. A large bird is probably not something that you're going to take to your local park. So you're going to have to seek out an RC park where you can fly. We highly recommend, as does the RC market, that you have insurance in case something does go awry. A large aircraft like that coming out of the air can do damage to property. So, you definitely want to have that insurance. And what we're trying to do is make it affordable, make the kits easy to assemble. And then also when there are the RF mistakes, which do happen, and you talk to any RC enthusiast, they'll tell you that he's, piled a bird in or two, which means crashed one or two of them. That it's affordable to recover. You've just not taken $1,000 out of your budget and destroyed it. So that's kind of the envelope, the bucket that we're in.
Now, we're talking about autonomous aircraft today, or drones. What do you think the automation in manufacturing will play to enable your company to compete with a Chinese firm once the FAA does pass the regulations to allow commercial use of drones or private use of drones for whatever businesses or besides the hobby industry? How do you think you can compete with that market? Because I know that China's ready to launch anything on us.
Well, yes, and a couple things is, number one, we've got some very dynamic engineers on staff. They're handpicked, and they've got a background on DoD programs in either robotics or UAV builds and or competitions, and so they've been exposed to the technology. They know how to develop it. They know how to quickly make something work at a systems level, which is, we kind of pride ourselves in that. So, first and foremost, we've been given hard requirements before, and we can answer those and develop the technology quickly. We do it much more effectively than a lot of your larger companies. They're sometimes very, very expensive, which is why the larger UAV programs, run into the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars. We can do things very, very quickly, very, very inexpensively, and that's the way to beat the overseas market. And the quality in the USA,
so how do you,
expectation is much better.
So how would we be able to reduce the cost of creating something like this and provide it at a lower cost with better quality?
Well, my business model is we've got very sparse, we're in rural America, number one. So the first thing is, in America, to compete in the international market, you've got to get out of the large cities. Otherwise your overhead is go up. So you've got to get out in rural America. You've got to be innovative with your infrastructure, and you've got to be extremely selective and innovative with your initial employees. Now, once you've got those, what you have to do is train in-house and bring young interns in, which is what we do, and train them specifically for this slice of the technology market. And, eventually I think the schools are going to embrace this business model. Other small businesses are going to see that it's viable, and they're going to understand that they can compete. But you've got to keep a very, very close eye on your overhead expenditures as the business owner or, the guy that's in charge, gal that's in charge of the books. But it can be done. And, and we're good proof of that. The government's really very excited because, they like our rates. They like what we cost to do business with. And we're producing, what I would call revolutionary technology.
Now, what are your views regarding the role of drones in civilian airspace in addition to having fun making these guys?
I'm sorry, I missed that one. Say that again.
I said, what are your views regarding the role of drones in the civilian airspace?
I think for first responders, they're an excellent piece of technology. There will come regulation with them and an understanding of what they can or cannot do, what they should or should not be used for. I think for our firefighters, there would be a wonderful use of technology. Law enforcement, there's some issues that need to be worked out there, but again, I think used correctly, they would be a wonderful asset. And then also, we believe that the agricultural market for precision agriculture and some of your surveying, your geoinformation systems and surveying, unmanned area vehicles or drones, as you like to call them, would be a wonderful use of the technology.
Well, what about risks? What kind of risks do you think the commercial air traffic would face?
Airspace deconfliction will always be an issue when you have unmanned aircraft in close location with manned aircraft. I think it was just last month. I'm almost positive it was last month, but there was a RC aircraft that hit a small Cessna aircraft because it was flying too close to a local strip, is I believe what happened there. So, airspace deconfliction is always going to be an issue. Personnel that are in control of the unmanned aerial vehicle are going to have to be familiar with all of the rules and regulations of manned flight. And then you've got technology failures, so you're going to have systems that have some kind of dual redundant system for recovery. You just don't want something, it's a simple, and the RC market sees it all the time. It's a servo burns out, and now you've got a condition of flight that's a problem.
Well, what about the frequency collisions? I mean, physical is just one aspect of it, but what about the frequency collisions in terms of being able to, let's say, be crossing? Because I believe one of the persons that was on the show was talking about how some of our flights are now also auto-piloted, even if there is a pilot in. So they are on a frequency that would almost get them on a level of an unmanned aircraft as well. So how do you think that's going to all play out in terms of having all these different drones flying around, but at the same time, who's going to be controlling what, and how do you know what frequency to go on? And I guess that's something I know FAA would have to be involved in terms of regulations. But from the technology aspect of it, because you're involved in RC control planes and stuff, you would have a better idea of how they would be able to deal with that issue.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that discussion does come up a lot. But and the analogy I like to use is if you look at your cordless phone use, say in a suburb, everybody's at the same frequency, but there's a different ID that is transmitted for each base. Now, some people remember the early cordless phones at 900 megahertz, and you could get bleed over, so you could pick up your phone and listen to your neighbor's conversation. And that was, a common occurrence.
Right.
You had one transmitter that would overpower the others. But after we got into the capability of having a handset matched to a base unit, and only listening for that ID, your frequency management has become a little bit easier. Now, if you talk to the comms guys, they will tell you that the spectrum is fast filling up. And the frequencies are starting to become, prime real estate.
Right.
But again, with frequency hopping and with the ID protocols that are in place with frequency hop, I really don't think it's going to be that much of a challenge to see much more clutter up there in the frequency space. But again, it's going to be something that somebody's going to have to take a close look at and make sure that they're doing the right things so that they don't clog the bands up. It'd be a terrible thing if we've become accustomed to UAVs and all of a sudden our first responders find out that they can't put up aircraft because the frequency's too clogged for that area when
Absolutely,
there's an emergency.
Right, and that's what I think one of the other concerns would be, is that how do you regulate the airspace with both commercial and private use? But our show is almost up, so I wanted to thank you for coming on the show today and talking about the future of drones, and hopefully I'll get to see you perhaps in Kentucky, because I have never been there. Never been there. Looking
Great.
Forward
well,
to
we look forward to hosting you.
Yes, I think it'll be great. I mean, I had a great time in Virginia Tech meeting you and your team, and they're phenomenal. I mean, they were just amazing. You have a great group of engineers that are working for you. So that's, I think, the first step to changing the future of America, is to actually get those great people working together and working towards a common goal, which is to have a better America for us in the future. So thank you for all the work that you and your team are doing to bring that about, and hope to see you soon.
Great. Thank you.
You have yourself a very good evening, Bobby.
Yep. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, this is Princess Aliyah with Leopards on the Prowl, co-hosting the show with Dan Smith. Not much, but at least I tried to give him some opportunity during the show.
You did, thank you.
And we're talking about drones among us today from the Great Falls Village Starbucks and on Wolf Spirit Radio. So Dan, what do you conclude from all the speakers, the great speakers that we had today? What did you learn?
Well, I've learned a lot. And
anything that stands out? I mean, what about just the fact of what is a drone?
Yes, well, I did have, actually, I wasn't sure what the difference was between, say, an RC aircraft and a drone aircraft. And I guess that has to do with that a drone aircraft is programmable. However, you could fly it as if it were an RC.
Well, I guess that's the main thing. A drone is an unmanned aircraft that can fly autonomously without human control. Well, hello. Well, Kashmir is here on the show again today, but I wanted to finish up and let people know just the difference, which is a drone is something that kind of has it's a plane with a brain of its own. Of course, somebody has to program it prior to and tell it what to do, whereas an RC control plane is you've got a remote control in your hand or you're sitting somewhere and you're controlling it continuously. So it's almost like having a pilot just somewhere else, whereas with the drones, we've got it doing its mission on its own without any major interaction during the flight. Does that clear that up for you?
Yes, thank you.
And did you know that drones have been around before that? And oh, by the way, I'm sure you know this one, that a drone is also an alcoholic beverage. You would know that, wouldn't you?
I didn't know
Did you know
that.
about the drone?
No, I did not know that.
I can't believe you don't know that. We should check with them. Perhaps next time you could bring a drone.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan, for coming on and trying to participate.
Thank you.
I know I didn't give you much of an opportunity, but perhaps next time there's another day, another show, which is going to be called Makerspace, Hackerspace, and Our Space. Join us next time on June 4th from 5 to 6:30, and we will discuss 3D printing and the future of 3D printing, which is another huge field as well.
As I learn how to program the engineering.
That's right. Well, thank you everyone for participating and listening in to the Leopards on the Prowl with Princess Aliyah. I will see you guys next time, and I did want to thank my special producer today, JP, all the way from Scotland. Thank you so very much, JP.
You're very welcome. Oh, a little one.
Oh yeah, that's a little one right here.
Here's
Anybody want to say hi to everybody? Can you howl like a wolf?
Hi, Kashmir.
How do you howl like a wolf? What does a wolf say? Ooh, that's it.
Well,
that's
like
right. On spirit.
Like this. Oh no.
No. That's it. That's the sound. They're the wolves. Yeah. She might get her first wolf cub next month.
Oh.
We're gonna go down to visit our friend at Rainbow Mountain, which reminds me, our challenge for our listeners last week was to send us photos of wolves. And what we're going to do is create an 18-month calendar, and we're going to be able to sell that on CashmereRose.com. And the proceeds from the sales of the calendars are going to benefit Wolf Totem Ambassador and Rainbow Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary Wolf Pack. So we hope you guys will send some great photos, and you can send those to leopardsontheprowl@gmail.com. This is Princess Aliyah with Leopards on the Prowl. See you guys next time, June 4th.